Make sure you understand this about the sphere, okay? This is without exaggeration, and if I knew a stronger way to talk, I would use those words instead. But this is going to be the greatest visual stimulation in the history of recorded entertainment. Not just in fighting. It'll be the best in fighting, for sure. In the history of recorded entertainment, this is going to be the most spectacular thing that you've seen.
So they're doing a UFC there in September. I mean, they're essentially planning for that, different than they've ever planned for any other event. It's going to be nuts. Yeah. It's going to be a nutty event. And I don't think they're going to do more than one of them. I think they're only going to do one. Because the idea is like it's so expensive to do and there's so much involved in preparing for it.
But I haven't let not one image of this thing get out there to the public. There's not one image out there. So, you know, again, it's hard for people to understand what this thing really is until you experience it. Yeah. And even walking through the sphere that we built inside the UFC headquarters, people were like, holy shit.
And by the way, I got a sneak peek, just a tiny little bit, and it is phenomenal. And if this thing comes off like they are planning, believe me, this is going to be so spectacular. It is going to just be unreal. And a lot of people have asked, is it going to translate to television? Not everything will translate because there's going to be haptic feedback in the seats and sphere, and of course, that cannot translate at home. But as much of the experience as possible will translate from the venue to the fans watching Noche UFC at home. That is the plan that they are trying to get, and I believe that they will pull that off.
So figuring out the lighting was the first thing. That took 4 months. It took 4 months to figure out just the lighting. Then it took months to assemble a team to help us pull this off. And then, you know, I'll give you an example. Let's say we do the show open on a regular Saturday night. That thing renders. Right, the rendering, do you know what that means?
Right, to get the video processed.
To render it, it takes a couple hours. It takes 12 days to render anything that changes. We had to build a render farm inside the sphere. Literally built our own render farm in there. The level of how complex this thing is, if I even laid a quarter of it out to the people, wouldn't even understand.
Now let me tell you why the sphere is so important. You and I both work for the UFC, and with the UFC, you know, when we go somewhere, we see a lot of the same people, right, Joe? You see a lot of the same runners. You see a lot of the same security. You see a lot of the same people that build the octagon, do all those things. But what you also see is the same producers. All the people that produce the shows are there. Zach Candido is the coordinating producer for talent and everything. You know what he told me? He said because he's so busy with the sphere, after Abu Dhabi, he's only working one show. When in the world have you ever seen those guys get that much time away to focus on one thing, especially when they have fights every single week? Everything else, time, energy, focus on the sphere. That's how big this fight card is going to be.
Just looking at the card, you're like, how is this all that great? Again, main event's great, but there's some bangers up and down the card. We talked about it on Monday's MK. But where have you ever gone where the venue itself provided tier 1 entertainment? It doesn't exist. Not like the sphere. Like, I've been to venues all over the world, all over the country. It doesn't exist like this. There can be an atmosphere in other ways, but the venue itself, the actual infrastructure of the venue, delivering on this sensory experience in a way that like nothing else can. There's just nothing quite like it.
All I know is that I was in the sphere that night watching you two, and I was blown away by the experience. And what I said too is that the sphere is the star of the show. So you literally sit back. I'm going to the Eagles. I'll be at the Eagles as soon as our event's done. I'll be at the Eagles September 27th or something. I'm going. And you get to sit back and listen to U2, all their greatest songs, and you're watching the screen, and every once in a while you'll peek over and look at U2 and whatever. So I said, it'll be fascinating to pull off a sporting event here where you'll have, we're basically doing movies. There will be a movie that night, and in between movies, we call them chapters of the movie, there will be fights. and you'll see our thought process and how we laid it out and how we figured this would work that night. But at the end of the night, we'll know whether it does or it doesn't.
I really thought with UFC Noche, with September 14th, with Mexican Independence Day, they'd really go big star-wise. I don't know if Sean's in that category. That could be why it's more the event and wow, UFC at the Sphere than the particular drawing power of the main event. Also, Alexa Grasso is their only Mexican champion.
And I have no idea if the UFC is going to pull this off. How often do you hear me go to the mat to defend the UFC? I'm not defending the Sphere Show pricing. It was outrageous, but just based on the economics of scale, they're somewhat limited in what they can do. But more to the point, like, is that the best card we've ever seen for a pay-per-view? Far from it. But that main event, O'Malley versus Merab, for all the problems of the labeling, Riyadh season, Noche UFC, all that crap, that's a far more legitimate fight than Canelo versus Berlanga, like by a million miles.
It's happening. The show's main event in the Sphere against Merab. I've had a feeling for a while. I was really pushing for the fight. Merab was pushing the fight. Ilya, Max were pushing for the fight. Connor wanted on the Sphere. Chandler wanted the Sphere. Everybody in the UFC wants on the Sphere because it's going to happen one time and one time only. Supposedly, this event is never going to happen ever again. And I get to headline it. I got a call for the production team the other day, and they said this shit's going to be a fucking movie. I'm going to have to put in some actual work during this promotion because of this. There's just the level of that's going into this. Absolutely insane. Honored to headline a main event, UFC Sphere. I am going to make Merab look stupid. I'm going to make him look silly. I'm going to make him look like he doesn't even belong in there with me.
A big weekend in combat sports, which is September 14th, of course, Mexican Independence Day. And the reason I say combat sports is, yes, the UFC is at the Sphere. You also have Canelo Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga in the same city at the same time. But of course, the big competition is between the UFC and Canelo Alvarez, boxing, essentially. It's interesting to me because one of the big debates is how much crossover there is between boxing and MMA these days, and how many independent combat sports fans can be drawn into either pay-per-view.
A big part about the Sphere, and we teased on it by comparing the Canelo fight to this, but a big part of we can play all we want that this is about UFC making Mexico an MMA country first, and that'll continue to take more time, but they're making inroads. It's also to go up against the old guard of these two Mexican holidays in Vegas, sure, which is the UFC's backyard, and saying, okay, Canelo, it just so happens that Canelo has an opponent that we don't deem on the same level as the other ones, but it's their way of saying, all right, let's actually go head to fucking head, same city, both on pay-per-view, let's do it. Why wouldn't this A, become the fourth major, but B, you could escalate that even more by saying every year it'll be at the Sphere, and it's Mexico Independence Day, and the other fighters, if the Sphere comes off well, will probably be fighting to want to be on that.
Internally, I'm hearing from all sorts of people that this is like, we can never do this again. This is going to be unbelievable, yes, but never again when we do this much prep work.
I'm wondering, like, what makes it so difficult? Like, how is it so difficult? There's like all these millions of dollars to make this happen. It's gotta be magical.
I think it's gonna be huge. I mean, it's a different play, different way they're gonna put like the order. I have no idea how the fight's gonna be played there, so it's inspiring and it's intriguing. How do I say? Interesting to know how this is gonna be, and just excited as you.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. A couple weeks ago, as we were heading into our first rehearsal, I was a little nervous to see everything sort of play out. And after we did that first rehearsal, it's been all smooth sailing from there. I'm in a good place. This is gonna be great. I am going to tell the story of the beginning of time in Mexico all the way up into the future of Mexico. The history, the traditions. The fighters know as much as you know. Okay. Yeah, they don't know anything that's going to happen that night. Obviously, the co-main and main event will be involved in rehearsals, so they know what's going on, but this is all a big mystery. Nothing is out there. Everybody's going to find out Saturday night what the show is.